Hello, all. Welcome to BFM Autism's first replay analysis. Today, we're going to be looking at a 15v16 ranked match from around May 14th or May 16th of 2026. And at the time of recording, that would have been about a month ago. We are going to be looking at a fight about efficiency, about geometry, especially at more higher levels of skill of BFM, and how small mistakes can add up to change the outcome of the fight. These replays, this include and those further beyond, are not chronological with the main BFM Autism series. And what I mean by that is that not everything that you're going to see in this replay has been covered in the BFM Autism series. That said, the concepts that I do cover that might be new at the time of recording will be partially explained. And if you're still confused, you can always, put a comment or send me a message, and I am more than happy to explain. To start off, when we come into this fight, we must define our main objective advantages. And what makes this fight different, what's special about it, the things that we want to understand. And that can be things like the advantages between the airframes, what are they good at, what are they bad at, maybe what the terrain shapes up for the fight, things like that. Terrain is relatively flat. We're not seeing any major mountains except for this ridge over here. There are some small hills, but nothing that would be impacting the fight to any extent, even a flat rate fight on the deck. For the aircraft themselves, we have an asymmetric matchup, an F-15 versus an F-16, which is going to influence our decision making and coerce us to engage different regimes of the fight. In this case, the F-15 is going to be an Ingalls fighter, trying to play for lower speed maneuverability, utilizing its instantaneous performance advantage, its better rate, its better instantaneous rate, its better radius, to try and slow down the opponent, pull them into their regime, cut them off, and eventually secure a win through that. For the F-16, however, they're playing as an energy fighter, trying to stay relatively fast, work within the 2 circle, push in plane geometry, trying to slow down the enemy until they can no longer maneuver against them, pushing that rate fight to try and come around, reduce altitude to reduce potential energy of the other fighter, etc., etc. You can also measure things such as the skill of the pilots themselves or energy states coming into the merge. Because this is we just spawned in, energy states are exactly the same altitude, same airspeed. As we, come into the merge and close that up, that might change, but nothing at the moment is significant. For pilots themselves, Askar Aviations is a very talented pilot. This is about a month ago, so they have gotten much better recently. If I remember correctly, they're number 4 in the world at the moment, at least of recording. But it is not somebody who I can, turn off my brain and go on autopilot for. It's somebody who I am going to have to work for to not die immediately. And these are things that we want to take into account as we come into fights is, how much do we trust ourselves to be able to engage this opponent? How much are we going to have to focus? It might be nice to be able to address that, I fought this person in the past and they've made these mistakes, or I know they're inefficient in this regime, and so that can help us to engage the fight. And of course, myself, I am a relatively confident fighter, and so I just have to compare myself against Askar and ask myself what I need to do to beat them. The penultimate thing that we need to take away for our fight is the regime in which we want to operate. and as we've adjusted in the past, the F-15 is trying to be an angles fighter, and the F-16 is trying to be an energy fighter. F-15 wants the 1 circle, the F-16 wants a 2 circle. And as we come into our merge, we need to manipulate the situation to our advantage from the very beginning. And the merge is typically the most penultimate part. It's the thing that can decide the fight outright from the very beginning. So as we come into the merge, we're going to see the tactics that both fighters use differentiate from each other and show how we are approaching the merge in different ways. To begin with, we're seeing the F-15 start to dive down slightly, gaining a little bit of speed, putting themselves below the opponent. And we see the F-16 pulling up and off to the side slightly. Now, if we recall from the turn geometry video, when we are pulling into a merge from a nose-up attitude, we are able to get a gravity assist over the top, which tightens the turn and increases turn rate. And that is what the F-15 here is trying to do. They are hoping they can get into this merge and engage from nose up and allow themselves to come over the top. And we're going to see that in play here in a bit. The other thing that they're trying to do is, as they come into the merge, they're trying to tighten up with the other person. The other thing we may recall is that separation influences how we engage the fight and the geometry of the fight itself. If we enter into a true circle and we get that close pass, the true circle will end up being heavily offset, and we keep coming to these head-ons and these faraway passages. If we come into the merge at wide separation, then the 2 circle will stay wide the entire time, because we never had that asymmetry to begin with. Because the F-15 wants to be an angles fighter and does not want the F-16 to be able to lock ourselves into this symmetrical rate fight, because that's where their advantage lies, it is within our interest to tighten up that separation off the merge and to deny that geometry. The F-16, on the other hand, is climbing up, which is increasing their potential energy at the current moment, and is pulling off to the side, which is creating that separation that they also desire so that they can come in and keep it relatively aligned. But again, as we noted, the F-15 is trying to deny that, and they close up. The other thing we notice is that as the F-16 turns away, they're giving up angles until they start reversing down, but by that time it's a bit too late. The F-15 has already gained a pretty decent lead turn into the opponent. And it's here that we start to see the advantage of getting that nose-up attitude. If the opponent engages into the vertical 1 circle, the F-15 will already have been turning and will be at a lower energy state because they started climbing up against gravity, and thus will have the tighter turn to be able to cut into the 16 and not 1 circle, on top of the fact that the F-15 has the innate raw advantage in the radius. If the F-16 goes down, then we start to get that 2 circle, but because of the close pass, it is going to be heavily offset, which provides the F-15 opportunities within that geometry to apply pressure or to reverse into a 1 circle at the next close pass. If the F-16 goes to the side, the F-15 is able to cut in from above, utilizing that gravity assist to make the radius tighter and essentially cut off the F-16 through that out-of-plane maneuver and essentially force almost a 1 circle. The F-16 at this current moment sees me going up to this nose-up attitude and wanting to push their 2 circle will be incentivized to dive down and into this vertical 2 circle geometry. Now, something that we noticed and recognized was the inability to create this separation off the merge. The F-16 is not always able to secure that advantage, especially against an opponent who is going to be aggressive on that matter and understands the importance of that geometry. And so sometimes the only thing that the F-16 can do is take the merge as it is and then correct the geometry after the fact. And that is what the F-16 should be doing here in a moment. They allow the merge to happen, secure their advantages wherever they can, and then use those advantages to correct the offset. And the advantage that or correction, the opportunity for that to happen will be occurring at the bottom of the circle. We see the F-15 starting to slow down as they fight against gravity. And as we come over the top, we're going to see the AOA increase, the speed drop further, especially as we're trying to apply pressure over the top to get the nose down quicker and try to engage that 16, see if we can spook him a little. The F-16, pursuing that in-plane two-circle, is starting to dive down, again following that two-circle geometry, trying to come down nose to tail. And as they do so, they're starting to gain speed. Now, preferably, because these fights are going to continue with this offset if nothing is changed, the F-16 is seeking to align themselves with the F-15 and then pursue that circle here. And the way that they can do that is by allowing themselves to gain speed through this dive. And through that higher speed, their turn will widen, which will bring them back up. And then once they align themselves with the circle over here, to prevent themselves from coming back down, they drop their speed, allow themselves to tighten up, reducing how far down they reach, and thus they have aligned themselves with the turn circle and have kept the fight aligned. Again, we are allowing ourselves to get that close pass at the merge, and then correcting it after the fact to get that smooth, aligned two-circle. And we will see here in a moment if that's what they do. Again, as we said, we see the F-15 applying pressure over the top. Maybe a very slight out-of-plane roll here, trying to break that in-plane motion. And we see the F-16 getting their speed, which is going to allow the turn circle to widen massively. F-15 is coming down now, applying pressure, F-16 climbing up and losing some speed, as is to be expected. However, I want you to notice two things. One, as this F-15 starts to dive, they're going to start unloading the stick slightly. You're going to see that AOA drop and the speed start to increase drastically. That's going to give them energy necessary for them to increase speed and then fall through their corner speed again as they pull for the shot here. And second, this F-16 is not going to be efficient in maintaining their speed during this climb, which is going to prevent them from correcting the offset and allowing themselves to get into this two-circle as they desire. As we push in, the F-16 is pulling rather defensively, pushing 19, almost 20 AOA. Speed is dropping down to 433, and they're not going to be able to have the larger speed to increase their turn radius and realign the circle. And what they've done is they've secured themselves to put themselves in front of my nose. With that tighter turn radius, it's making it easier for me to pull up into them. And as I noted, we're seeing that F-15 gain their speed throughout the dive, the AOA decreasing slightly. As they gain that speed, and then eventually are able to utilize that to pull into the bandit slightly. And remember, as this close, pass is occurring, we are getting those opportunities for offsets. As long as this fight has that relatively close separation, this fight will continue to be offset until the F-16 corrects it or until I make a mistake. And so it's within my incentive to, as long as this happens, to allow this fight to be offset and to apply pressure wherever possible until I'm either no longer able to or until I get a shot. Now, F-15 on the bottom, we're seeing 483 knots, probably going to increase slightly as we get to the very, very bottom. F-16 around 383 knots, a decent bit too slow for over the top. Now, vertical two-circle efficiency tends to be focused on gaining speed throughout the dive, sustaining it through the bottom and the climb, and then utilizing instantaneous rate to turn more efficiently over the top. The idea being that when we pull against gravity, we are being inefficient because gravity is working against us and creating more drag than we would over the top. We produce more lift because gravity is assisting our centripetal acceleration. So it's more efficient to create more lift given a unit of airspeed over the top than through the bottom. And so we want to pull hard, gain that speed right back, and then get back to the top as soon as possible, effectively rating. But we see the F-16 not doing that. The AOA decreases slightly. we see it staying relatively tame. They're holding the speed, they're not pulling, and they aren't applying the pressure as they would, want to do. And if you remember from the turn geometry video, when we get that efficient, vertical maneuver, we see almost this X shape where it tightens over the top and we have this elongation of the turn, right? But here it's almost perfectly circular, which means again they're easing over the top. They're allowing themselves to be inefficient compared to here where we see this, nice crisp elongation in the vertical. Now, as the F-15, I see this F-16 able to get their nose up, and I don't know exactly what their energy state is at this exact moment. In the cockpit, it's difficult to assume the energy state of the enemy without getting a radar lock. And as far as I know, this enemy is at 480 knots, right? And is, applying pressure over the top, trying to push me in the vertical 2 circle and, slow me down. And because I do not want that to happen, I need to redefine the fight, break the geometry, and cause problems. And the first thing I do is break out of plane. We are trying to break out of plane to prevent a problem and to force the enemy to make a corrective action to fix that geometry. The F-16 wants to apply rate, and rates will only work as long as we're turning within the same circle. If I'm turning this direction and the F-16 is turning this direction, no matter how well the F-16 turns in that vertical, it will never make them catch up to me if I'm turning the horizontal. And so it's within their incentive to keep themselves aligned with me, to turn themselves along my own turn circle, so that they can push their rates against me. And so, knowing that, I break out of that in-plane motion, which, if for the F-16, their response should be to turn to the left, to try and counter that nose, do the opposite of what I do, and pull themselves along my turn circle. Again, we're remembering that they're currently at low speed, and thus they're not being very efficient with their rate. I'm at a decently high speed, and I'm expecting to have to come back around for this turn rate as they come down, but that's not what happens. The F-16 instead rolls out and places their lift vector into lead pursuit directly in front. Now, what this does is, one, they're putting themselves at first glance into a rolling scissors. I would expect them to come underneath and try to apply pressure that way and try to slow me down for that regime. But instead they roll out, and now we're entering this flattened out rolling scissors and eventually transitioning into this one circle fight. And if we remember, the F-15 wants to be in the one circle fight. Because the 16 did not realize their opening to push this 2 circle, and potentially with that to realign their geometry after that out of plane maneuver, they've put themselves into a regime where they are not efficient. They don't have as good of a turn rate compared to my aircraft, and they're at a worse energy state for it. One, they are diving, which means that they're going to be gaining speed. Two, with diving, they are working against gravity, which means that their turn radius is going to be widened. Again, remembering that geometry video. And on the other hand, I am at a lower speed later on in the fight, right here. I start to have the slower speed compared to them, which means I'm going to have the tighter turn radius. On top of the fact that my aircraft just generally has a tighter turn radius overall. And I'm pulling with gravity, getting a gravity assist and thus a tighter turn from that as well. So as we come into this, we're seeing that one circle develop. And from their perspective, we see the F-15 getting that offensive. Because of that, the F-16 turns defensive, and of course we saw the F-15 losing speed as they noticed that one circle cue and applied pressure, increasing the AOA, dropping the speed, trying to slow themselves down, trying to get that better turn radius, which if the F-16 plays their cards right, they can turn this snapshot into an energy trap if, again, they defend this shot and play their cards right. Though that is going to be pretty difficult. Because the F-15 is slow, the F-16 should be able to theoretically utilize this slow speed to force me to climb up against them. If they climb up and over the top, I would be forced to climb back up with them. But however, notice the separation present. Because we entered into a one circle, we're being forced into this close pass, which means that if they climb up, I'm going to overshoot below them, which means that we're going to get another offset geometry situation. And if they climb up, that distance is going to increase and is going to allow me to start applying pressure again as I have the ability to pull. When that enemy is far away, they move less in your field of vision compared to if they were right next to us going the same speed, they'd go faster across our field of vision. And so if the enemy is far away, we are able to more easily keep our nose on them. It requires less energy because we have to pull less. They move less in the sky, which means that that snapshot is easier for us. And so because of that close pass, it is not within their incentive to climb, but rather to stay co-altitude with us and to dive down. They want to stay on the same altitude with us to minimize how much range they produce to prevent that instant rate snapshot from the offset. And so what they ought to do is to descend down slightly and use that dive for negative PS and to gain a higher performance turn as they come around. And with that negative PS turn, they're getting a higher turn performance, pushing a higher rate than I expect to be, and might be able to neutralize their angles, because currently coming into this pass, I am gaining a 90 degrees angles advantage, mostly because of this defensive jink here. They spent a decently long time going defensive, and thus their flight is relatively straight, and thus they're not applying pressure through angles. They're not turning, which gives me free angles. So coming into this fight, you'll see the F-16 starting to climb up. F-15 is pushing around 470 knots, which is pretty all right. But again, we're seeing this geometry being set up. F-16 came into the bomb. Their turn around 480 knots and is now pushing 460. Again, they're pulling very defensively throughout the top of this turn, and thus they're not allowing themselves to have the energy necessary to pull hard over the top, get through this cycle faster, and effectively rate, which is going to cost them in efficiency and in rate performance. F-15, as they dive, they see this range increasing, see the offset being generated, and using their excess of speed, they pull up, despite the inefficiency from gravity, to apply pressure to the F-16. Now, of course, we see the AOA increasing, we see the speed decreasing, which does put us in a critical state. If the F-16 is able to take advantage of our low energy state to trap us into a two-circle with some sort of energy trap or energy fighting technique, this could be costly to us. However, given the presence of this offset, it is in our advantage to apply this pressure, because it will likely cause the F-16 to jink and to defend, which reduces their pressure in the angles. They're not turning against us, which provides us more and more advantage. We get further along in our angles compared to them. And that brings us, ever closer to getting them to slow down using their defensive tactics and to put them into our regime. Because again, we want them to slow down so that they fall outside of their rate band and are unable to continue their turn rate. So we see the F-15 applying pressure. The F-16 kind of stalls slightly, not exactly stalled, but kind of lingers over the top of this turn. Given that pressure, they start defending these shots. And also notice, again, with this defense, they're flying very straight. They're not turning. They're not applying pressure. They're rolling, but they're not moving in any given direction. And again, that's buying us angles. Approaching this, we're seeing more than 9 degrees of angles advantage. Again, because we applied pressure, despite that low energy state, we were able to force them to give up some angles through that defense. So coming into this pass, we see the F-16 pushing about 500 knots. And at this moment, they are relatively overspeed given their current attitude. They are nose down directly at 500 knots, which I would call to be the absolute maximum that you should be in any given situation with the F-16. They haven't even finished their dive yet, which means that they're going to overspeed heavily throughout the rest of this dive. And this is likely a result of nervousness. One of the big topics that we talk about within BFM is our confidence and aggressiveness as a pilot. If we are in a situation where we're getting thrown around a little, as we see here, if we are not confident in our abilities and we are not confident enough to understand what's happening, nor what we need to do to correct the situation, then we make mistakes. This is our classic OODA loop, our observe, orient, decide, act. If we do not know enough, or if we get frazzled, then we start making poor decision making. We do not rise to the occasion when we're put under stress. We fall to that which we have practiced or to that which we have experienced. And if we are not used to being in these stressful situations, we start making mistakes, such as this overspeed. F-16 getting this fast throughout the dive, one, is going to make it much harder for them to turn, because if we remember our first video, when we have excess speed, centripetal acceleration is not able to be generated to offset that, and thus our turn performance starts to diminish. We're being gene limited. Secondly, with this immense speed, their turn radius is going to be very wide, which again, as we come into this close pass, we're going to see this offset geometry, which is worsened by them being fast with that wide turn. They're going to have an even larger range as the F-15 comes around to apply pressure again. That said, let's take a look at this F-15 here. F-15 is coming down with a lot of speed and is in kind of the same boat, being about 526 knots at their exact nose down. They're over speed, which is inefficient. And as they come down, they're not going to be able to achieve their corner speed as quickly as they could have at a lower energy state if they manage their speed. Now, they are in an offensive position, at this exact moment that we're seeing 90 degrees of angles advantage, which theoretically they do have the room to make a mistake. But if we want to play efficiently, which is necessary, especially at the higher levels of VFM, this could be costly. And so we see the consequences of those actions. We see this turn radius start to balloon heavily as we start pushing 580 knots or so. And again, we're seeing this, because of the turn circles being widened on both sides of the fight, we're seeing this offset geometry become even worse. So theoretically, this is a double-edged sword. We are increasing the turn radius and thus the offset, but we're not able to capitalize on our angles as we apply pressure, which is going to force us to have to apply the speed brake, apply a higher angle of attack, trying to slow down so that we can get those that instantaneous rate performance from our corner speed. And we start to see that here. We start applying that pressure. F-16, on the other hand, they're hitting 540 knots on the bottom of their turn. And as they climb up, we're seeing that angle of attack starting to increase, the speed is starting to decrease. And again, we're seeing this repeated pattern of not having speed for the top of their turn, which is allowing themselves to linger here. The speed is staying constant. They're not applying pressure. And again, that's causing the top of the turn to be elongated and almost circular, which is causing an inefficiency in rate and allowing us to, with our corner speed and our instantaneous rate, to gain more angles and apply more pressure, which we see resultant here. The F-15 is able to gain a snapshot, forcing the F-16 to go defensive slightly. And again, we're seeing the consequences of being nervous and of applying pressure. The F-16 is starting to overspeed again, 520 knots throughout this dive. We're seeing the consequences of rate inefficiency as the F-15 gets closer and closer to securing themselves within the control zone of the F-16. F-15 during this cycle is at a better speed, 450 knots throughout the dive, not overspeeding as last time, which is going to keep them closer to the F-16 in angles and keep them more efficient and better suited to apply pressure during this cycle. F-16 throughout this climb, we see the speed decreasing to be expected, and then they start to pull, the speed is decreasing rapidly, right? And again, another repeated pattern. That defensive mindset, which is influencing them to pull hard, is keeping them from being efficient over the top of the turn. And again, we're seeing that rate inefficiency. They're not able to pull around, which is allowing the F-15 to gain more angles with each cycle. The F-15, having maintained their speed, is better suited to hit their quarter speed and gives them a better instantaneous rate performance. And here we see the effects of this very nice snapshot, a relatively low angle off, except for as the F-16 starts to turn defensively somewhat. They start going out of plane slightly during this. F-16 again, we're seeing a very slight overspeed. F-15 staying very securely behind the F-16 inside the control zone. And the F-15 at that moment, because they were in the control zone, don't need to worry as much about energy efficiency or energy management. They don't need to get too close to the corner speed and maintain a perfect sustained turn rate, because given the angle off this moment, they only have to wait for the bum this turn as the opponent starts to climb against gravity for them to pull that instantaneous rate and capitalize on that snapshot. And so at this moment, it's essentially in the bag for them. And here we see that snapshot. F-16 starts to turn defensively, draining that speed. Again, if this fight continues, we're going to see that inefficiency over the top due to the lack of speed, which is going to provide the F-15 more angles during the cycle. And here we see that splash from the F-15 on the F-16, and that's the end of the fight. Now, we're seeing a lot of repetitive patterns and repetitive mistakes and concepts here. We're seeing the effects of efficiency within our energy, the effects of nervousness and mentality. How do we trust ourselves to do the right thing? How do we know what the right thing to do is? How do we trust ourselves to act quickly to prevent mistakes or to neutralize a situation that has gone poorly? How do we manipulate the merge to our advantage? How do we control angles and altitude and etc.? And all of these concepts are extremely important for high-level BFM, because when it comes to fights like this, where we have a good player versus a good player, it's no longer about making the right decision. We're no longer trying to, select the right option, know when the right time to hit a two-circle is, or know when the right time is to do a yo-yo or some other maneuver. If both people know what the right thing to do is and execute it correctly and do choose the right option, it's no longer about picking the righter option. It's about doing that option more efficiently and doing it better, doing it faster. And that's what we're seeing in this fight here. Two good pilots having to play efficiently to get the advantage instead of playing correctly. And again, we're seeing that with our, how are we handling the vertical two-circle? How are we handling our speed throughout our dives? How do we handle the merge in the first place? What are our options? How do we handle close passes? Do we, make a mistake, climb up, or do we change the situation, recognize we need to reduce that range and keep that geometry from, falling away from us? It's having confidence and playing efficiently that is the decision maker in these high-level BFM fights. And it's through this reasoning that we must allow ourselves to learn and to understand and to trust ourselves. The only way that we learn the correct option and learn how to play efficiently to minimize this range and to control the fight to our advantage and to understand, these vertical two-circle efficiencies, we must study and practice and learn. We must learn so that we understand what our right option is whenever we enter that, OODA loop, so we have the ability to orient ourselves against this information and thus be able to make the correct decision the next time it happens. We must practice so that when we are in these situations where we have only a split second to make the correct decision, we are able to act upon it with, trust in ourselves and trust in the technique so that we make the correct decision instead of making a mistake. And so that when we are pressured and when we are in a nervous situation, we are able to trust that practice and trust our instincts to make it the correct decision when we can't exactly trust our rational or question our emotional selves to be rational, right? And throughout all this, again, we're seeing efficiency, we're seeing practice, we're seeing learning be the difference maker in efficiency. Because again, we're not trying to make the correct decision. At high level BFM, the only goal is to be 1% better than the opponent. And if we are able to play 1% more efficiently than the opponent, or 1% better than the opponent over a long enough period of time, then we gain enough advantage to eventually win the fight. And that's what matters, is playing efficiently, monitoring the situation, having the capability to recognize the energy state of an opponent, or having the capability to recognize when something isn't going your way and to go out of it, right? Or to recognize when an opponent has made a mistake and being able to capitalize it on quickly. These are the skills necessary. That is going to be about it for this fight specifically. I hope that it was enjoyable for all of you and that you get something out of this. If there's something that's confusing or that you want to be explained or you want a little bit of more information on, feel free to leave a comment or message me and I'd be more than willing to explain. If you want future replay analysis videos to be changed somehow, if you want a different format, if you want things set up slightly differently, if you want a different way of explaining, feel free to ask and comment it, and I'd take it into consideration for the next videos. Again, this is largely experimental. This is the first video of this kind, and I'm hoping to make much more of these with different setups, with different situations that have different lessons within them, different examples, and different topics. As I want to create as diverse of a, deconstruction and ability to learn through practice as I possibly can. Because one of the greatest things about BFM is we're all able to learn together as a community. That said, I hope all of you have a great time and keep on learning.